Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome back to another Adobe XD Masterclass. My name is Howard Pinsky, Senior XD Evangelist here at Adobe, and I hope you're all doing well on this Friday afternoon. If you are tuning in live here on Behance, let me know in the chat who you are and where you're tuning in from. We've got Cornell and Wade, Mitchell, Mick, Oliver. Great to see all of you. Hope you had a great week. Hope you're excited for the weekend. And of course, excited for another Adobe XD Masterclass. This is Masterclass number 91. We're 9 away from the big 100. Let's get started. All right, hopping over to my screen, we are going to be creating a YouTube style hover effect today in Adobe XD. So if I go ahead and play this preview that I uploaded, I think last week or the week before, something like that, and I'll show you the actual thing in just a moment. But you can see that we have a little bit of a hover effect. Let me play that one more time. Hover, video playing, right? We have a little bit of a preview that plays when the video kicks off. Now, I'm going to note from the get-go that one of the transitions in this effect requires a little bit of a workaround, but you can still achieve something very similar without that workaround, but I will show you exactly how that works shortly. We've got Eric from Germany and Mitchell from Wales, Melissa from Pennsylvania, I think, PA, Pennsylvania. I believe so, right? Maybe, I don't know. Nabil says, how are you? I'm doing okay. Still dealing with a herniated disc, which, you know, there are some good days, some bad days. You know, it is what it is. I'll survive, hopefully. Melissa, great to see you. Gareth. Alrighty, so let me hop over to YouTube for a second to show you this in actual action. So you may have seen this on YouTube. If you go to youtube.com, you've got your feed over here. It doesn't work on channel pages, but it works on the actual YouTube homepage. And you'll notice if I hover over a video, the first thing you'll notice is that there's a little tag right there, right? It says keep hovering to play, and that'll allow you to actually preview the video that you're going to watch. So it'll show you that for a second, and then this will enlarge, and then it'll actually start playing the video. Now, depending on the size of your monitor and your screen, there we go. So if I zoom out just a little bit, you'll see that the buttons are horizontal, and if it's a little bit more zoomed in, the buttons are vertical. So we're going to actually be designing the horizontal version, but of course you can kind of take it in either direction. Hey Drew, great to see you as well. All right, hopping over to Adobe XD, we are going to get started. Now, because we're only going to be focusing on the actual hover effect, in this particular case, we don't really need to do a specific artboard. So I'm going to do something like, let's say 1200 by 900. Oops, that's not even 1200. 1200 by 900. It's a nice 4:3 aspect ratio, which traditionally would be perfect for Dribble. But I believe, if I'm not mistaken, Dribble now allows you to upload videos and photos in many different aspect ratios, especially if you're putting together a case study. Now, if you're uploading to Behance, which I should mention, on Behance, actually, let me go over here. Quick sidetrack. Behance. Let's go to my profile. I know some of you have been waiting for this to be released. If you missed it, I did release the Boop Finance UI kit. So go over there. You'll be able to download it as a project file over here to the right-hand side. And you can browse through this, which we built on the last masterclass. So it is now available. You can download the XD file, have fun with it, use it in your projects. No restrictions. It does have some stock photos in the UI kit. Don't use those because you'll have to license them. But you can use the design, have fun with it, knock yourself out. All right. Cornell's asking question. Can you add hyperlinks which will redirect you to a specific website to text, images, and elements in XD? You can, and maybe I'll show you that during this masterclass. All right. So we're going to start. Again, we are going to be replicating, for the most part, the YouTube hover effect. So I'm going to start by dropping the color of the background to a nice dark something in that effect. And let's start building out the thumbnail. Hey, Mwenda, great to see you. And Ashfaq and Theo, great to see all of you. And Bruce, kind of jumping around, and Yasin. All right, so we're going to start building out the initial state, which is what you see before the hover effect takes place. And then we're going to kind of build out from there. So grabbing the rectangle, we want to start by designing or, actually blocking out the thumbnail for the video. Now, the thumbnail is likely the same size as the video, or at least the aspect ratio. So what I like to do in this case, instead of guessing, is within the properties inspector over to the right, I can enter something like 1280 by 720. Now this is obviously way too large, but if I go ahead and lock the aspect ratio right over here, I can now shrink this down. I don't have to worry about sizing. So I'm going to shrink it down to something around this size here. And we have our thumbnail, right? I'm going to make sure to center it. Adobe Piracy is in the chat. Well, there goes the message. All right. So let me go ahead and hop over to Finder. I wonder who that is. I wonder if it's a troll or if it's like a legit account. I don't know what that's all about, but their message just went poof. All right. I'm going to go ahead and grab a thumbnail. And these are just standard images. This is the thumbnail for one of my recent videos where I showed off Path View, which is a newer feature in XD that shipped with the latest update, which I'll probably show you at some point during this masterclass. So I'm going to go ahead and drag this into the rectangle. Boop, there we go. Fits perfectly because it's the exact same aspect ratio. And what we're going to do is underneath, we want to have our user profile, and we also want some text describing the video. Now, first thing I want to do is round out the corners ever so slightly. Let's try about 8. Let's try about 4. Now, you might notice on this side over here, right on the right-hand side at the bottom, the thumbnail is a little bit darker, and the background is also dark, right? So we have a little bit of blending going on, which you typically want to avoid. Now, when you're working on an experience that's meant for a video platform, there's going to be so many different types of thumbnails. You just won't be able to find a perfect background that will allow your thumbnails to pop naturally. So in this specific case, what you'll probably want to do is add a very slight border. So I'm going to go ahead and turn a border on. And usually when I'm working on a darker background, I like setting the border at pure white. So all these Fs, right? And then dropping the opacity somewhere around 8 to 10%. In this case, I might want something around 8% to make it nice and subtle, right? So you can kind of take a look right over here. So it still kind of blends in, but it still adds a little bit of a border around the thumbnail so that it pops from the background. Now, of course, depending on the background, color, and opacity and all that fun stuff, you might want to tweak the border color and the border opacity a little bit, but I think this could work. All right, right underneath, we're going to add our user profile. So I'm going to grab my ellipse tool, shortcut key E, and drag one out. And like I mentioned, almost every masterclass, as you're building out these elements and experiences, if you're designing zoomed in like I am, just go ahead and hit that play button at the top. It's on my other monitor, and pop it over here, just to really get an idea of how things are looking. Because if you're designing zoomed in, it might look okay, but when you actually zoom on out to what it's actually going to look like, it might be a little bit too big, too small, might need some tweaks. This looks pretty good, so I'm going to probably keep it as is. And then over to the right, we are going to go ahead and add some text. Now, I believe the official text that YouTube uses is Roboto. So I'm going to start by typing out the title of this video. Path View. Let's go using Path View in Adobe XD. Something like that. In terms of the styling, it's all obviously going to depend on how large your thumbnail is, how large the profile picture is. We don't want this too large, so we're going to drop this quite a bit. Let's try 16 for now. And I do want to switch over to Roboto. And we're going to choose a nice white color, so it's nice and legible. And we're going to bump up the weight, because this is the title, the primary text in this particular element, to bold. Now we may want, just to kind of, level things out a little bit, we may want to, bring this onto 2 lines. So I'm going to actually switch this over to fixed width, or auto height. It used to be called fixed width. I think it's now auto height. Or is that? I don't know. I'm going to just bring this on in so we have 2 lines, just like that, right? And we're going to get to the user profile in just a moment. Now, down below, we're going to want some secondary information. So if I duplicate this text down, I'm just holding down Alt-Option and dragging. I am going to drop the size quite a bit, maybe about 2 pixels. I say quite a bit, but not too much. And I'm also going to drop the weight as well. And I may even consider dropping either the opacity or the color. In this case, I'll just drop the color to a little bit more of a gray. There we go. And this is going to be for my name. And then below this, we may want some information about the video. So let's just say it has 31,000 views. It probably doesn't, but we're going to run with it. And maybe it was uploaded 1 month ago. Take a quick peek, and that's looking pretty good. Now there is this large space over here, so let me just fill this out using path view to name components in Adobe XD. That's a bit better. All right, that'll do. Now, beside my name and besides some users on YouTube, there is a little verified badge. So I want to go ahead and just very quickly, just so we have something that looks relatively accurate to YouTube, I'm going to very quickly create one here. I'm going to turn on the square grid command and control apostrophe and just use that grid to create a nice check mark like that. Ooh, turn that off. Make this a little bit smaller. Maybe I'll bump the weight to about 2, possibly. We'll see what that looks like. It's a little bit large, so I'm going to just drop it a touch. This might be also a bit large. That could do. I'm going to make sure to group this and call this check. All right. Now, very quick tip. In some cases, you may have multiple of these elements going across. Maybe it's in a peak grid or a stack or whatever it might be. And you may want to mix things up a little bit so that not every single card is the same or by the same user. So you may jump in here and type out, let's say, Nabil, right? But you're noticing that check mark over to the right stays in place and don't necessarily want that. Of course, we could dive in here and kind of move it on over, but you'd have to do that over and over and over again. So this is a great opportunity to use a stack. So if I go ahead and select my name over here and also the check mark, holding down the shift key and clicking, I'm going to place both of these into a group. I'm going to call this group user. And then over within the right in the properties inspector, I'm going to turn a stack on. And what you're going to notice is it not only defines the stack based on how the elements inside of this group are laid out, in this case, horizontally left to right. It also defined the padding. So notice that there's 7 pixels in between these 2 elements. Now, you can change it, bump it down a little bit, or bump it up. Completely up to you. You can do that in the properties inspector or directly on canvas. But the important thing to note is if I dive in here now and do the exact same thing, Nabil, did I spell that right? Yes, I did. Right? You're noticing that that check mark automatically moves as we're making changes. And this works horizontally or vertically inside of a stack, which is amazing. Someone's asking, why is it that auto height, the adjusters are in the center and not the corner? Oh, so I think if you're probably talking about this particular area here, this just allows you to, so auto height allows you, this one I believe, what you're talking, no, that's auto width. Auto height's the second one, sorry about that. This is this one. So we have, it just allows you to adjust in both directions. So you can move it left to right or up or down like that. In some cases, on some elements you have the transformation in the corner. On text, you don't. I don't know the exact reason why, but there you go. I don't know. It's a good question. All right. Over to the left, we have our user profile. And for this, I'm going to hop very quickly over to my libraries. I'm going to go to my toy faces. And I do have the Howard toy face right over here. Boop. There I am. And I might want to add a very subtle border as well, just in case the background is also a little bit dark. In this case, it's not, but it might be in some cases, so I'll just go ahead and do that. All right. So let's take a quick look, and our thumbnail's looking pretty good. If we hop over to YouTube to take a quick peek, more or less the same. Now, the one thing we haven't added yet is the timestamp at the bottom right-hand corner. So I'm gonna quickly hop over here, grab my rectangle. Let's draw one out. It is on the darker side. And I believe it's slightly transparent. So I'm gonna just drop the opacity to about 95 possibly. We don't wanna go too much. Because if you go too much, then you're gonna see too much of the thumbnail in the background, which is gonna make the text on top of it a little bit difficult to read. So we'll do something like 95. We'll round out the corners a little bit, so we have about 4, so we'll probably just drop it to about 2. And then we will do something like, I don't know how long that video was, but it probably wasn't more than 5 minutes. So we'll say 4 minutes and 10 seconds. We'll stick with Roboto. Switch it over to white. How's the size looking? It's a little bit large. Did I make these toy faces? I did not. So someone in the chat, Wade, will probably post the link in the chat to toy faces, but they were made by an amazing artist. And yeah, that'll be in there shortly, hopefully. Now, this is another opportunity to use, not necessarily stacks, but it'll, great opportunity to use padding. So if I grab the text and also the background layer, place that into a group, timestamp. I'm going to turn on padding over within the properties inspector, and this will allow me to define the amount of space around the text layer and the background. Let's drop this a little bit to about 8 and 8. Now, what I would love as I'm changing the timestamp, I would love for the background to automatically resize. And that's what padding does by default. But you're going to notice if I dive in here and do, let's say, 10 minutes and 34 seconds, right? It's adjusting to the right, which is kind of pushing it off the thumbnail in some cases. So I'd have to go back and move it over, right? But if I just select that text layer and switch over to align right within the properties inspector, right over here, I can now, right, adjust it in any direction, or adjust it and it's going to go to the left, which is exactly what we want. All right, so things are looking pretty good. I'm going to make sure to group some of these elements. We've got user, we have our views, we have our text. All right. I'll just call this info. And our initial state of the thumbnail is now complete. Now, knowing that we're going to have additional elements kind of fly into view when we create this hover effect. Again, I'll show you the preview, right? So it kind of pops out. There's a background over here, right? You can see this background. There's the little menu icon over to the right. And we've, of course, have our buttons, which we're going to design horizontally. So knowing that we have these elements, yes, that is the toy faces that we are speaking of. Thank you, Wade. Appreciate that. So knowing that we're going to have these elements, we might as well design them before creating the component, just to make our life a little bit easier. So what I'm going to do now is, and sometimes what can sometimes help is just taking screenshots of what you're going to be designing. So I'll just take a quick screenshot like that, hop back over here and paste it, just so we have something to reference, right? Perfect. Okay, so let's go ahead and create our button. Now this button will span, there'll be 2 buttons that kind of span equally across this element. So I'm gonna drag this out until it snaps to the center, and then just bring it back a little bit, maybe by 8 pixels or so. That way, if we do have 2 of them, we have a nice amount of padding. It looks like it's a little bit too thick or too wide. We'll bring it back about 4 pixels, and I'm very easily doing that by just holding down the Command key on the Mac or Control key on Windows and using the left arrow or whichever direction you want to resize by 1 pixel at a time. And you might notice that these buttons are also very slightly, actually the entire thing is very slightly transparent, right? You can see in this screenshot, you can see through it a touch. So we got to definitely keep that in mind when we are working. Now, in our example, there won't be anything behind the thumbnail. So we may not necessarily need to worry about that transparency, but if you will have something back there, maybe we will at some point, definitely keep that in mind. Sample that color to keep consistency. We're going to round out the corners just a little bit, maybe to about 4 to match our thumbnail. And this one does not have a border, so we're not going to worry too much about that. And then we want to make sure to add the label and the icon on top of here. So we're going to use the same typeface, the Roboto typeface, but this one is all caps. So we can either do it manually, or if you forget to do it, or you want to change it later on, over within the Properties Inspector, you can switch over to uppercase. Michael is asking, how did you copy paste the screenshot? So on the Mac, if you hold down Command, Option, Shift, and then press the number 4, Command, Control, Shift, and 4, you'll get this crosshair, as you can see right over there. That will allow you to take a screenshot directly to your clipboard. If you leave out the Control key, I believe, then you'll just save that screenshot to your desktop. A little bit of a confusing shortcut, but that's I don't know how to do it on Windows, but that's how you do it on the Mac. All right, so we have our watch later label, and now we need an icon. You can, of course, use an icon that you might have in a library in your computer, or you can hop over to your plugins, hop over to your Icons for Design plugin, block, and this one looks pretty good right here. Move that all the way down here. Cornell's saying Windows Shift S on Windows. There you go. Thank you, Cornell. Now, the label and the icon on these buttons are not pure white. They're a little bit gray. So I can either go ahead and sample or just, estimate it, but sampling could work. I want to make sure to use the same color. Of course, you can add this color to your assets as well to make it a little bit easier. Make sure it lines up. And center this. Looks a little bit off. It looks like this should be a little bit larger, possibly. The button looks a little bit wide or thick. Drop that down a little bit. That'll do. Not going to spend too much time on the buttons, but that should do. I'm going to make sure to group this, and knowing I might be using this particular button throughout several elements, I may want to turn this into a component. So I'm going to name this. Actually, you know what? I'm not going to name it. I'm going to do that on purpose. Now, I want to turn this into a component. You could do that in your document assets. I'm going to avoid that on purpose again. Over to the right, you can press the plus button within your Properties Inspector, or you can use the Command or Control K shortcut. And my shortcut overlay is not, there it is. Is that the one? There it is. That's the older one. Gotta fix that. Anyways, so we've gone ahead and created our component. Now you're gonna notice inside of our layers panel, because we did not name the group, or if we had several elements selected, it's named it component 1-1. A little bit annoying, right? Now, traditionally, if you were to rename this component right here, it would not rename the actual component inside of your document assets. So if I hop over to my document assets, here's my component, right? Component 1. Again, traditionally, name it here, it would not push that change over. But now, what should I name this? I don't know. Preview button. I don't know why that took so long to think of. Preview button, right? Now, because I named it on my main component, if I hop over to my document assets, it now pushes that change, which is amazing. Great quality of life update from the team, but it goes a lot further than that. We introduced the ability to organize your components and your colors and your character styles a while back. But now we have path view, as you can see up here at the top. And this will allow you directly from your layers panel to very quickly not just rename your components, but also organize them. Now, on this particular document, I don't have a very in-depth design system, but assuming I did, what you're able to do now is you're able to do something like this. So maybe you have a dark version and a light version. So I can do dark, right? Slash, and then maybe buttons, slash, and then the name of the component. And of course, you don't have to use, dark buttons and then name. You can basically do whatever you want, however you group your components inside of your document assets. So this would be, was it preview button? And when I press return, you're going to notice it spaced them out, but that indicates that it's now organized inside of your document assets. So if I hop over down to my document assets, it created those groups for me. And of course, if those groups already existed, then it would just place this button inside of the dark buttons group, which is amazing, right? All right, so we have our first button, and now we want our second one to add to queue. I'm gonna duplicate this over, make sure it snaps. Now this is another opportunity to use probably stacks, right? So if I hop over here to my main component, I'm gonna make sure to group. Info, I'm gonna turn stack on. That way, it pushes it to my instances. And if I make sure, actually, forgot to center it, hop over here, and then add to queue. Now the icon, we definitely want to swap out this icon with something different. Let's try a playlist. That could work. I think. Where did it go? Did it add it anywhere? It did. Oh, this probably does not work inside of, I don't think this plugin works inside of a component. So I'll just copy that, hop down here, and paste it. Delete. All right, should be good. Perfect. All right, so we have our buttons, and of course we also want the background of this particular experience. So I'm gonna very easily, we can actually just grab our thumbnail, duplicate it. I'm gonna sample this background color. Oops, I just duplicated the whole thing, which I don't want to do. I'm gonna duplicate that. Let me move it outside of here. Sample this color. Now we don't need to see it initially, and it's all actually very similar to the color of the background, which is gonna kind of throw us off. So let me actually change, I'm gonna just tweak this just a little bit. There we go. Perfect. Now initially, we're not gonna be seeing this background. Now it looks like there's a very slight shadow on this background as well. So let's bring this out a little bit, just so we can see everything at once. We're gonna add a very slight shadow. Very subtle shadow. Drop that down a little bit. Perfect. Okay. So again, initially, we're not going to be seeing many of these elements. So what we want to do is I'm just going to hide this behind this thumbnail. Now we can either hide it behind a thumbnail, or we can just drop the opacity, which actually may be a better idea, so we don't have this weird animation happening. So I might just want to keep it here and then drop the opacity down to 0. Just like that. I'm going to name this background. And we have our buttons, which also will not be visible. So I'm going to drop that down to 0. And we essentially are back to where we started. But we have our elements, almost all of our elements, that we're going to need in the next state. Now I say almost because we did forget our menu to the right, which is basically this little kebab menu. Do you all call it a kebab menu, or is that just like a very specific thing in the design world? Duplicate. Duplicate. That'll do. I am going to group this, call this menu, and it does look like it lines up basically with the center of this line of text for the most part. So I'll pop it, I'm just gonna eyeball it, and it does, so it's not right on the edge. So I'm gonna bring this in a little bit. That'll do. I'm gonna drop the opacity to 0 as well. You can also hide it. And then finally, you don't see it on this one, but on the actual preview here, you have that keep hovering to play label that replaces the timestamp, right? Let me zoom in, right? Now, because we're going to be using essentially the same element, we probably don't need to really recreate this. We can probably in the next state just basically replace this, right? All right. My zoom, there we go. My zoom broke everything. All right, we're good to go. So we have all of the elements in place. I'm gonna make sure to, this is our screenshot, move this out. And what we wanna do now is we want to turn this element into a component, just like we did previously with our buttons. So either within the properties inspector to the right where the plus button is, or the command or control K shortcut, we now have our initial state for this element, right? Now I will note that the buttons inside, one of them was a main component. That was now converted into an instance because of the fact that it's now inside and nested inside of a larger component. So I'm gonna go ahead and name this dark slash, it's not a button, so we'll just create a new group, elements slash preview. Bam. And hopping over here, isn't that amazing? Just so simple, so convenient. We now have our elements group inside of our dark group, which is wonderful. All right. What we want to do now is we want to start working on the second state. Now, I did mention that one of the transitions will require a little bit of a workaround, but we're going to create both states and then we'll talk about the different transition. So over within the properties inspector, over to the right, I'm going to create our hover state. And this is going to be automatically wired up by default, which we may change, but we'll see how things go. And as a quick reminder, over on YouTube, the initial hover state is simply a very quick change. There are two things that changes. One, the keep hovering to play label pops up, and then two, the menu icon right below also pops up. And nothing else changes. There's no animation, there's no dissolving, there's nothing. But just basically that, right? So all we have to do with the hover state created is dive in here, and we're gonna find our menu. I'm gonna bring that back up to 100%, and we're going to change this label. Now, because we created a group with padding earlier, all we have to do now, keep hovering to play. Is that what it said? I think that's what it said, right? Yep, perfect. All right, that's it. Very simple, right? Now, if we go over and preview this prototype, we can now hover and we can see it in action. Now, you're noticing a little bit of animation going on, and that's because by default, hover states are wired up with auto animate. Now in this case, we don't really need that because we just want to cut from state 1 to state 2. So if we hop over to prototype mode, it's already selected our hover state, and we're just going to change the type from auto animate to transition, and then we want to make sure that there's no animation, so from dissolve to none. And now if we play one more time, we now have our hover state, right? Which is wonderful. Simple, right? But of course, we want to take it one step further. We want to be able to actually preview the video when this enlarges. There's a few ways we can do this, right? We can start by creating that actual state. So I'm going to press the plus button and create a new state. Now, because there's a video involved, what we might want to do is actually replace this element here with the video with a static thumbnail, right? Does that make sense? So let me actually go ahead and hop over to Finder. I'm going to find a video very quickly. I'm going to move this over here just for a second, just in case there's top secret information. And where was the videos? There was that, and then I think it was here. Yes, I believe this. And speaking of videos, in the latest update as well, in addition to the path view that I just showed off, I completely blanked. We also increased the video limit, the file size, to 20 megabytes, which is great. We're going to keep an eye on that as well, but just want to make sure that performance doesn't suffer as the video sizes go up, because it does snowball, right? If you have one video at 15 megabytes and another video at 20 megabytes, not too bad. But if you have like 30 videos, or I think the limit might be 20, but if you have like 20 videos all at 20 megabytes, you know, could start suffering a little bit. All right, so we have our video here. So what we want to do is, I'm going to dive in here on the main component, and this we actually want to replace with a video. So if I go ahead and set this to a solid color, I can drag a video, boop, right in there. Now, this isn't necessarily the video that corresponds to that thumbnail you just saw, but we're going to run with this. Now, if we hop over to and grab the video, right over here to the right, we can choose how this video plays back. Now, on the initial state, we don't want it to play back at all. So we're going to set it to no playback. Now, when we do get to the point where we will be playing it back, we can choose whether to loop it, we can scrub the video, play, or we can also choose a custom thumbnail, right? Which we definitely want to do. Now, again, in case this pops up any... All right, looks like we're okay. Just wanted to make sure there wasn't any like top secret information on here. You never know, right? So I'm going to switch over to... Where do I have my thumbnails? Where do I have my thumbnails? Hold on. I gotta browse again. Videos, thumbnails. All right. Updated and thumbnail. There we go. So when you set a custom thumbnail inside of this little heads-up display, it's going to display the thumbnail until the video actually starts playing, which is great, right? Which is perfect for an experience like YouTube. All right, so if I press play, everything looks pretty much the way it did. And because we edited the main component, it pushed those changes to the different states as well. So if we take a look at the hover state and dive in here, we now have our video with the thumbnail in place. All right, let's see. Patrick is saying, sometimes I can't set transition to none. Anyone know why? It's a good question. I mean, it could be a lot of different things, including what you have set for the type, but in general, it should allow you to set the animation to none. But yeah, it should. It's an interesting question. But I'm not sure why that might be happening. So we have our default state and we have our hover state. So again, what we want to do now is set up that next state that allows the video to actually play. And one more time on YouTube, not only does the video play, but it also enlarges and then it starts playing, right? So we're going to create one more new state. And I'm going to call this playing. And we're going to dive in here and we're going to make some changes. So the first thing we want to do is start enlarging all of these elements, right? And we also want to bring back our buttons. We're going to make sure our menu is back. There we go. And we're going to start by enlarging our thumbnail and make sure our background is in place. Make that a little bit larger. We don't need it too large. We're going to enlarge this. Beautiful. We don't need the timestamp, so I can either hide it or set the opacity at 0. Let's see what this looks like one more time. All right. Let's move this down here. Stretch. Whoop. Menu over to the right. Whoop. Looks okay. We have our buttons somewhere right about there. It looks like the buttons are probably need to be a little bit larger. That should do. 12, sure, why not, right? All right, that looks not bad, right? We have our default state, and then we have everything that enlarges. But of course, we want the video to actually start playing on this particular state. So what we want to do is dive in, select the video within the layers panel, and then over to the right, this is where we want the video to play automatically. And then in this case, we probably don't need the video to loop. So once it gets to the end, it'll just stop. And if we wanted to, we can also trim the video. So if it's too long, you just want to play a little bit of a preview, you can do that right over here. All right. Perfect. So if I go ahead and just preview this, you'll notice that the video starts playing, which is exactly what we want. But what we actually want is we want to go from our default state to our hover state and then to our playing state after a certain amount of time. Now, by default, it's not that easy, right? What we can do is we can go from our default state to our hover state. So if we switch over from hover we'll keep on hover, but our destination state to our playing state, in this case, we do want a little bit of auto animate, so we will auto animate. Maybe we'll stick it to ease out and 0.3 seconds. If we play now, right, we can do something like that. And that looks pretty good, right? It looks almost like what YouTube's experience looks like. However, we don't have that middle step. One more time, right? We have that middle step where it says keep hovering to play, and then takes a second, and then it enlarges and hovers. Can't really do that by default. So we're going to work on we're going to use a little bit of a workaround. I'm going to undo this. Undo till we go back to our hover state with transition animation set to none, right? What we want to do, we want to find a way to go from our hover state to our playing state automatically. Now you could, use a click or a tap or a key trigger, but we want it to do automatically. Now, components themselves cannot transition automatically to another state. However, if you have a video or a Lottie animation, you can do it, right? So what we want to do is we could use just any Lottie animation, but I made a video on this, and you can check that on my YouTube channel. But I have over here this Lottie file, just a simple JSON file that I created in After Effects and exported as a JSON, which is a Lottie file. And this is, I think it's a 2-frame Lottie animation. So it essentially kicks off and finishes immediately. And this is what we can use to help us transition to the next state. So if I dive into this hover state, I'm going to drag this Lottie file in, and in the video on YouTube where I explain this workaround or hack or whatever you might want to call it, there is a link that you can download this Lottie file. Now it looks very bad because it's a very small image. We don't need to see the image, so I'm going to just drop the opacity to 0. But we want to make sure that inside of the Properties Inspector, we want it to play back automatically, and we do not want it to loop, because if it loops, we won't be able to get out of this state onto the next state, right? So we're going to keep it at no looping. Now, inside of prototype mode, you're going to notice we have the wire poking out of this Lottie file. And of course, you can use any Lottie file. If you go to the Lottie Files plugin, you can search for a Lottie file that's incredibly short, and you can try to use that. Or you can grab the one in my video description on that video itself. Now, inside of prototype mode, we have the wire that allows this Lottie animation to play back automatically. But we want to be able to, after this playback is complete, we want to be able to transition to the next state. So right over here to the right, we're going to press the plus button, and that'll create another interaction. And then over within the Properties Inspector, we want to set the trigger to end of playback. And again, this is only available on Lottie animations and videos. So once the playback of that Lottie animation or the video is complete and looping is not turned on, it's going to perform the action down below. And in this case, we want auto animate, and we want to transition to the playing state. And I think something like ease out 0.3 seconds should work, but we can always come back and change that. Now, what you're going to notice, I'm going to leave everything as is, but what you're going to notice, if we did this properly or incorrectly on purpose, is that when I hover over this element, it's going to show that label for like half a second, maybe like a millisecond, and then it's going to transition to the playing state, right? Watch. Right? We don't want that. We want to show the label for about half a second, and then, or maybe, a second, and then we want the transition to kick off. So back in prototype mode on the hover state, where we have our fake Lottie animation, we have the time trigger. We want to set the delay at about 1 second. And this is the delay before the Lottie animation kicks off. So in the background, we won't be able to see the Lottie animation because we hit it, but in the background, it'll be 1 second that basically 2-frame Lottie animation is going to kick off, and then the transition is going to happen using end of playback. So one more time, right? Now you may have noticed something flew off there, and that was probably because we had auto animate and we had an element that was missing. So we had keep hovering to play, right? Timestamp, and we changed it here. So if we hop into playing, thumbnail, timestamp, I'm going to change this so it's consistent. Why was padding not working? I don't know. Keep governing? No. Keep hovering to play. And for some reason, this one wasn't adjusting, but I'll manually do it. Let's see if that helped. There's the oh, forgot to hide it. There we go, much better. So one more time, we've got our keep hovering to play, and then it enlarges and it plays the video. Now, the only downside to this particular method, this little workaround, is that this particular state here, this playing state, isn't technically a hover state. So if we move off of it, it doesn't unhover, right? Whereas if you're on an actual hover state, like here, and then you move off, it will unhover. So it'll reverse that interaction. But in this case, it doesn't, right? So you can't really move off of it. So now I know some people are probably thinking, well, why can't you just have another hover state on this? And you sort of can if you have a nested component. But the problem is you'd have to move over to a specific location. You wouldn't be able to kick it off for a certain amount of time. So we have to use this little bit of a workaround to transition from state 2, which is our hover state, over to our playing state, right? If that makes any sense. Now, of course, you can take this a lot further, and you can then use this to transition to another screen. So I'm going to move this down here, delete that because we're pretty happy with it. And I'm going to duplicate just so I have the same size artboard. And over here, what we might want is to create just a very simple video page. Let's do the same thing, 1920 or 1280 by 720. Whoop, what did I do? 1280 by 720. We'll have our video right over here. I'm not going to round to the corners on this particular element, but I do want to bring in that same video that we had previously, which is this one here. Whoop. And on this page, we want this to play back automatically. So I'm going to dive in here, set it to play automatically. Probably don't need it to loop, and we don't have any audio, so we don't have to worry about that. We don't need to trim it. And I'm going to actually just grab some of these elements to make my life a little bit easier. Maybe I'll grab all of this actually. Move it over here. Paste. I don't know if this is exactly how things are looking on YouTube, but we're going to run with this. Stretch it on out. Move this down here. There we go. And just to have a little bit of fun, I don't think this is true to YouTube, but over to the right, we may want to add some Lottie animation so we can actually interact with this video. So as an example, what we might want to do is hop over to our plugins, go into our Lottie Files plugin, and let's search for something like heart. Something like that could work. I can drag this on there. Now, this is one of those interesting Lottie animations that start out completely blank, so you can't really see what's going on. But if I go ahead and preview this prototype, you can see that there's it only played once. Let me loop it. You can see there's a fun little animation down there, right? But what we want to do is we want to create our component. So let's just create a very simple rectangle like this. Maybe it'll be gray with a little bit of a border. Round at the corners to about 4 should work. And inside here, we want to create a hollow heart. So one that's not filled in just yet. So with the polygon tool, shortcut key Y, I'm going to draw one out. And then over within the properties inspector, what you want to do is enter less than 3. Boop. Now we have a heart. Fancy, right? It's a little large, so I'm going to make this a bit smaller. That could do. And we have our Lottie animation right here. Again, it's a little bit tricky because you can't really see it, right? But it is there. Sometimes with these blank starting Lottie animations, you have to experiment a little bit. Almost got it. Okay. But what we want to do is we don't want this to be seen initially. So we're going to make sure to select all these elements. We're going to create a component and we're going to place it into our dark slash, maybe this will be button slash heart, right? And there it is. Wonderful. And on this state here, again, we do not want to play it automatically. So we want no playback. But when this is tapped on, we want to transition to the next state, which will be our animation. And here we're going to hide the heart, but we do want this to play back automatically. And then we want it to transition one more time. So one more new state, and this will be called filled in. And we do not want this to play back. Great. But we do want this to be displayed, but we want it to be a filled in heart with no border probably. Bring that over a little bit, and this will be our liked state. We have our default state, we have our animation state, which again you can't see right away, and then we have our filled in state, and we want to make sure that after the animation completes, it'll transition to the next state automatically. So we have our time trigger. We're going to add another interaction and a playback. We're going to do transition to our filled in state, and probably don't need any sort of animation. And then one more transition from our filled in state if we want to unlike this particular interaction. We can click and we can go to our default state. So let's see if this works. Let's zoom on in here, and oh, we forgot to set up forgot to set our initial interaction. So from this state here, we want to go to our animation state. Transition, none, perfect. Okay, one more time. Woo! So the heart across those two last two states is a little bit different, but it's not too bad, right? Of course, I would spend a little bit more time to make sure. And there are Lottie animations that essentially start with a heart to make it a little bit easier. So the heart would be visible. It's kind of like this one here, right? So it's visible initially, and some of them probably also have an outline at the beginning. So you can probably do the whole thing with just one Lottie animation, and you don't have to worry about some of these other states, right? But let's do one more interaction while we still have a few more minutes, and this will be a little bit more of a fun one. So maybe there is a subscribe button. I think the subscribe button is typically, what does the subscribe button look like these days? I know they always change it. Let's see, are we subscribed to this channel?
The most
yes, we are. Okay, I need one that we're not subscribed to. Probably not this one. There we go. Okay, so it is still red. Okay, good. Let's fill this in with red. Let's round at the corners. It's a little large, but subscribe. Group padding. Let's do, let's try 6 maybe. 15, no. 16. 16. I think that's still too large. Boop, 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 boop. All right. Now it doesn't match the size of the other icon. Ignore that. Pretend that this doesn't exist, right? Oof. All right, let's zip through this quickly. So basically, when subscribe is clicked on, what we want to do is go to a new state. Subscribed. Wow, subscribed. Thank you, Wade, for posting that link. And this will be subscribed. Could have done the other way. I'm already messing up, aren't I? That's what I get for rushing. I want to make sure that this is right. There we go. Much better. Much better. Okay, subscribed, but we want some sort of fancy explosion animation kicking off. So we're going to go Lottie files one more time. Confetti. Come on, find me some confetti. Come on, Lottie files. Let's do it. Confetti. Woo, we're going to drag that in here. Oh, we definitely don't want to make sure, we want to make sure that we're outside of this button. So this button, oh no, no padding, go away. We'll get through this. Confetti. Come on. Confetti. Again, it's one of those things that you can't see initially because it starts out blank. We're going to pop it right about here, maybe make it nice and large. And then from our default state, we're going to click or tap, transition to our subscribe state. Let's see if that works. Whee! Confetti. I don't know. YouTube doesn't actually have that, but maybe they should. Maybe they should put confetti when someone subscribes. Maybe more people will subscribe to my YouTube channel, youtube.com/HowardPinsky. That'll wrap things up. Stick around. Kyle T. Webster is coming up in just a few minutes. Big thank you to everyone who has tuned in. I'll be back next week with another masterclass, and I'll see you all then.